Well, it's October, so today we're going to be talking about spooky, scary skeletons. In particular, the ones that people have been finding in dollar stores, mostly the Dollar General store. As you can see, this one I painted with Vallejo brush-on primer, and it looks good. It's got some decent detail, but however, when you actually handle it with any sort of pressure at all, the paint just starts flaking off. You know, obviously, with the miniatures I use, they're going to be going through some pretty tough handling. You want to make sure that the paint will stay on there. Now, as you can see from the video, certain parts of this miniature, like the skull and the head of the little sickle there, they don't lose paint, but other parts do. So I thought maybe if I try out different priming ideas, maybe I'll find one that'll be good for these things. But let's see what happened. Krylon plastic fusion did not work. As you can see, paint easily flakes off. This is actually one of the ones that work the least well. Again, I washed and dried these things properly. It's just the material just doesn't prime. Then I tried Modpodge with a touch of gray paint. And this stuff is pretty tough, but it kind of ended up rubbery, and it just pulls away from this, whatever weird plastic these skeletons are made out of, it just pulls away from it way too easily. Golden Gesso Dried 30 hours. Now, this is actually one of the ones that kind of worked out okay. Now, there is some cracking at the joints when you really stretch it, but the thumbnail test actually wasn't as difficult. Some parts kind of came off, but other parts, the gesso just stayed right on there. So I think this would be good if you were doing some sort of like scenery, maybe. Golden gesso would be a good way to sort of prime this stuff to get paint on there. So here's another miniature. This is the dog zombie miniature from the Dollar Tree stores. Obviously, it was just even worse. This is properly washed, rinsed, and primed with brush-on primer, and I'm hardly putting any pressure on this paint at all, and it's just chipping off right away. So, I mean, it's just, there's almost no point in painting something like this. The complete opposite. This is a Reaper Bones. As you can see, I'm pressing with my thumbnail much harder on this than I did with the cheap dollar store miniatures. This is primed just with brush-on primer, and the paint's not going out. As you see, I'm even going to go back and forth a little bit with my thumbnail, just trying to scrape the paint off, and it's just not happening. This primer is staying on there. So what about varnishing and sealing? A lot of people will say, well, if you just seal the product, then you'll have no issue. This is a caveman from TimMee miniatures. As you can see, even stored on a box, no issues, but looks what happens when I bend the old club there. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing keeping the paint on, and the primer, all that does is provide a nice thick layer of paint that will immediately crack and peel off as soon as there's any sort of pressure put on the miniature. Barely bending the arm, and just huge swaths of the paint are just falling off very easily. It's a shame. Now this is a Reaper Bones one. That's not happening with this one. I used brush-on primer for this, and then just Reaper paints, and I put a little bit of acrylic sealer on there, and that paint's not really going anywhere when you twist and turn it. There will be cracking if you really, really twist and turn the miniature, but generally the paint's not going to like come off and cracks, and there's not going to be any issues with that. So, clearly you can see the difference. No real cracking, no paint coming off when I give this miniature a tough round. And this is actually one of the first Reaper Bones miniatures I painted, is the Reaper Minotaur here. And again, I don't think I even primed this one. I think I just painted directly on the Mini. As you can see, there's some cracks, but they completely disappear. And look, I am bending this cleaver in half, both ways. And I want you to note that this thing has absolutely no damage to it at all. So that's what I'm looking for with miniatures. If you're not going to get to the point where you can get the paint on there that tough, I really don't see the point of the miniature. And just another example, resin miniature. Just a very basic paint job and a little bit of protection. And there's a tiny little fleck. And that's important because this guy has been in my game box for over 2 years. So again, with these miniatures, I don't think there's any point in buying the dollar store skeletons. The only caveat to that is that maybe if you're doing something with scenery, maybe you can use them for something. I did find this giant bone spider here. Certainly you might be able to do something with that. And just a quick note, if you think I'm being too tough on these dollar store skeletons, please refer back to my other dollar store video. All those miniatures still have their paint. As always, if you found anything good recently, please let me know in the comments.